Hello, and welcome to Reformed Thinking. We are so glad you are joining us.
Yes, it is great to be here with you all.
Today, we have a very specific mission for this deep dive. We are doing a rigorous theological examination of the first chapter of Paul's epistle to the Romans.
Which is quite an undertaking.
It really is. And we are relying heavily on the comprehensive commentary by John Peter Lange, alongside the insights of Philip Schaff and other noted scholars included in that volume.
Right, those are fantastic sources for this.
Our goal is to walk you through Paul's greeting, his core thesis regarding justification by faith, and his devastating analysis of human corruption.
And God's righteous wrath.
Yes, absolutely. We want you to see how these ancient words speak directly to the core of the Christian faith. So let's unpack this text verse by verse, looking closely at the language, the history, and the theology.
It is an absolute privilege to be here. If you look at the overarching theme of the source material we are covering today, it is the stark contrast between the saving grace of God and the absolute depravity of man.
It sets up a pretty intense divine antithesis right out of the gate.
It does. You cannot comprehend the heights of God's grace until you have looked into the depths of human sin.
And the reality of God's holy wrath.
Precisely. We will see how Paul systematically strips away every human boast, whether from the cultured Greek or the moralizing Jew, leaving all of humanity inexcusable before the Creator.
Which makes the revelation of God's imputed righteousness not just a theological concept, but the desperate, singular hope for the world.
That is the heart of it, yes.
Let's start right at the beginning, looking at the messenger, the message, and the majesty of Christ in Romans chapter 1, verses 1 through 7.
Good place to start.
Paul introduces himself in verse 1 as a bondsman of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle separated unto the gospel of God. There's so much packed into that single line.
There really is, just starting with his name.
Right. He is Paul. Lange points out the significance of this name, which means small in Latin.
Yes, and he was formerly Saul.
Which is a name associated with the tall, proud king of Israel's history, and the most distinguished name in his own tribe of Benjamin.
It is quite a shift. There is a beautiful suggestion here that Paul chose this name, the small one, after his victory over Elymas, the sorcerer, on the island of Cyprus.
I love that detail.
It acts as a symbol of the small man of God, defeating the mighty magician of the devil.
What stands out to you is how he identifies himself immediately as a bondsman, a doulos of Jesus Christ.
That word doulos carries immense weight.
What does it imply in that culture?
Well, it indicates total, absolute submission to Christ's will. A bondsman has no autonomous agenda. His entire existence is bound up in the will of his master.
Like a slave.
Yes. In the ancient Roman world, a slave was property, stripped of individual rights. Yet in the Old Testament economy, the title servant of Jehovah was a badge of the highest honor.
Applied to figures like Moses and Joshua, right?
Yeah. And the prophets. So Paul glories in this position, understanding that perfect subjection to Jesus Christ is perfect freedom. He places himself entirely at the disposal of his Lord.
But he pairs this humility with immense authority by adding, called to be an apostle.
Exactly. He is not a self-appointed missionary. The word apostolos indicates supreme divine authority over the church. He was a chosen delegate.
Personally instructed and commissioned by the risen Christ.
Yes. This separation, this being set apart, was a divine determination of his historical career. It did not just happen spontaneously on the road to Damascus.
It was planned.
It was a providential singling out from birth, actualized in time, to bring the message of salvation to the Gentile world.
And he immediately grounds this message, this gospel of God, in history. In verse 2, he says, it is the gospel which he had promised afore by his prophets in the Holy Scriptures.
Which is a crucial detail for his audience.
Because he is writing to a church in the center of the Roman Empire, a place obsessed with novelty and new philosophies.
Right, they love the latest intellectual trends.
Yet, he tells them that this message is no abrupt innovation. It is the fulfillment of ancient promises. It is not an afterthought, but the forethought of God.
This is a core pillar of the Reformed perspective. There was one continuous covenant of grace. The entire Old Testament is an organic system of prophecies anticipating Christ.
Augustine had a great quote about that, didn't he?
He did. He noted that the New Testament is concealed in the Old, and the Old Testament is revealed in the New.
So by connecting the gospel to the prophets, Paul proves to the Jewish mind that Jesus is the promised Messiah.
And simultaneously, he proves to the Gentile mind the divine origin of this faith. Only God can prearrange the future across centuries.
So Christianity is actually the oldest religion.
Going back to the first promise in paradise after the fall, It is the realization of the desire of all nations.
Moving to verses 3 and 4, Paul sets up a fascinating contrast regarding the dual nature of Jesus. He writes that Jesus was made of the seed of David according to the flesh, and declared to be the Son of God with might, according to the Spirit of holiness, by the resurrection from the dead.
He is placing the human ancestry right alongside the divine majesty.
The theological depth there is staggering.
We need to break it down carefully to avoid ancient errors regarding the nature of Christ.
Let's do it. When Paul says Christ was born of the seed of David according to the flesh, what does flesh mean there?
The Greek word for flesh, sarx, refers to his true, complete human constitution. It does not mean sinfulness, which is sometimes how Paul uses the word elsewhere.
Right.
It means the frail, mortal human nature possessing a true body and a reasonable soul, sin only accepted. It links him historically to the royal line of Israel, fulfilling the Davidic covenant.
But then we have the antithesis, according to the Spirit of holiness.
Now, this is not a reference to the third person of the Trinity of the Holy Spirit.
Oh, right.
No, it refers to Christ's own divine nature, which is intrinsically holy and eternal. The resurrection did not make him the Son of God. He was the eternal Son of God from before time began.
So what did the resurrection do?
The resurrection was the public, historical installation or manifestation of his divine majesty. The Greek word horistheus means he was established or instituted as the Son of God in regal authority.
So it vindicated his deity.
Yes. Think of it like a king who has been living in exile or disguise. He is always the king, but coronation day is when his kingship is publicly declared and recognized by all.
That makes perfect sense. We have this majestic picture of the risen Christ, the Lord of all, and it leads directly into Paul's apostolic greeting in verse 7.
To all that be in Rome, beloved of God, called to be saints, grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ.
Look closely at that phrase, grace and peace. It seems like a standard letter opening.
But it is actually a total alteration of the way people greeted each other in the ancient world. It is an inspired synthesis.
How so?
The standard Greek epistolary greeting was charein, wishing health or prosperity. The traditional Hebrew greeting was shalom, meaning peace. Paul takes the Greek greeting and elevates it to charis, which means grace, the unmerited redeeming favor of God. Then he combines it with the Hebrew shalom, elevating it to mean the deep spiritual peace of the soul reconciled to God.
Notice the cause and effect relationship there.
Yes. Grace is the objective cause. It is the fountain of God's love poured out on the undeserving. Peace is the subjective effect in the believer's soul.
You cannot have the peace of God until you have received the grace of God.
Absolutely. And by coordinating God our Father with the Lord Jesus Christ as the joint source of this grace and peace, Paul is making a massive theological statement about the deity of Christ.
A strict Hebrew monotheist couldn't associate a mere man with Jehovah like that.
Not without committing blatant blasphemy. It is a clear declaration of equality of essence.
We see a beautiful display of a pastor's heart combined with a global mission in verses 8 through 15. Paul begins by expressing his thankfulness for this famous church.
He says in verse 8, "First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you all, that your faith is spoken of throughout the whole world."
I love his enthusiasm over the fact that their faith is renowned globally.
We have to remember the context. Rome was the absolute center of the ancient world.
It was massive.
The population was huge, drawing people from every corner of the globe. It was the hub of politics, commerce, and culture. A thriving Christian church there was a strategic foothold for the gospel.
The commentary quotes an old Latin adage, doesn't it?
Yes. Orbis in urbe continere. The world is contained in the city. Because Rome was so conspicuous, a strong faith there would radiate out across the empire along the massive network of Roman roads.
Paul definitely recognizes that strategic placement, but his thankfulness is also intensely personal. He thanks my God, showing a sense of personal obligation and relationship.
And he does it through Jesus Christ. In the Reformed view, all our prayers and praises must come before God, sanctified by our spiritual communion with Christ, the sole mediator.
Paul doesn't just thank God for them, he prays for them constantly. He makes a solemn oath in verse 9.
Calling God as his witness.
For God is my witness, whom I worship in my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I make mention of you. It's striking how he describes his worship.
Whom I worship in my spirit. The Greek word for worship here, latreuo, is highly specific.
What does it mean?
In the Greek translation of the Old Testament, it is used for the ministration of the Jewish priesthood in the temple. Paul is saying that his priestly function is not an external ritualistic act at a physical altar with animal sacrifices.
It is a living internal reality.
His spirit is the temple, and the preaching of the gospel is the substance of his ministration. His appeal to God as a witness is a devout recognition of God's omniscience.
He is saying, I don't have human witnesses to how often I pray for you in secret, so I call upon the searcher of hearts.
It shows the immense spiritual striving of the man. His mind is constantly fixed on Rome, asking that by the will of God he might finally have a prosperous journey to see them.
When he talks about wanting to see them, there is a beautiful moment of humility in verse 12.
He says in verse 11 that he wants to impart some spiritual gift to strengthen them. But then he immediately adds, that is, that I may be comforted together with you by the mutual faith both of you and me.
He wants to give, but he fully expects to receive.
It is a striking admission. He does not elevate himself above the need for Christian fellowship. Even an inspired apostle needed the comfort of ordinary believers.
This highlights the objective reality of the communion of saints.
He expects that their common faith will be a reciprocal encouragement. Think of a veteran CEO who still needs to sit down with colleagues and just talk shop, to be encouraged by their shared goals.
He wants to strengthen them for their specific calling in the metropolis.
And in return, he expects to be refreshed and supported by them for his further mission to the West, specifically his planned trip to Spain. He wants to gather fruit among them, just as he has among the rest of the Gentiles.
That leads to his famous declaration in verse 14, where he views himself as a debtor.
I am debtor both to the Greeks and to the barbarians, both to the wise and to the unwise.
He feels an immense obligation. To grasp the cultural context here, we have to understand the ancient mindset regarding Greeks and barbarians.
It represented the great divide of culture and nationality. The Greeks considered anyone outside their linguistic and cultural sphere to be a barbarian.
Because foreign languages just sounded like bar to them.
Exactly. And the wise and unwise represented the divide of intellect and education. Paul recognizes his divine obligation to bring the gospel to every single class of humanity.
He owes them the gospel because Christ has commissioned him to deliver it.
Imagine holding the cure for a devastating global disease. You would be a debtor to every sick person until you deliver that cure.
That indebtedness is what fuels his readiness to preach even in the intimidating imperial capital of Rome.
A city that was the pinnacle of both civilization and depravity.
This brings us to the very thesis of the Epistle to the Romans, justification by faith. It starts in verse 16 with a bold claim.
For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ.
Picture this against the backdrop of Rome. It's a city defined by pride, worldly strength, military conquest, and intellectual elitism.
The ancient world considered the concept of a crucified Savior to be absolute foolishness and weakness. To the Roman mind, strength was found in the legions, in the emperor, in philosophy.
The concept of virtus, or manliness and martial valor, was everything.
So to worship a Jewish teacher executed by the state on a cross, the most degrading, agonizing, and humiliating form of punishment reserved for rebellious slaves, was utterly shameful.
The Roman orator Cicero even said the very word cross should be far removed not only from the bodies of Roman citizens, but from their thoughts, their eyes, and their ears.
Yet Paul stands facing the greatest empire on earth and says, I am not ashamed.
Why? Because, as he says, it is the might of God unto salvation.
The gospel puts to shame the worldly strength of Rome. It is the highest manifestation of the compassionate love and grace of God.
Think about the vast scope of this salvation, reaching to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first and also to the Greek.
The concept of salvation, soteria, is incredibly comprehensive. It is not just a vague idea floating on clouds in the afterlife. It is a complete, total deliverance.
It rescues man from the depths of hell,
From the condemnation of his own conscience, and from the righteous judgment of God's wrath. It elevates the believer to the heights of heaven, making them a participant in eternal blessedness.
This salvation is offered to the Jew first because of their historical priority in the Old Testament revelation and the covenants.
But it is equally for the Greek, which here represents the entire Gentile world. It is a universal offer, but it has a specific condition. It is for everyone that believeth. Faith is the receptive organ.
What are they believing in? That brings us to verse 17, the heartbeat of Reformed theology.
For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith. As it is written, the just shall live by faith.
The phrase, the righteousness of God, is monumental.
Everything hinges on this phrase. The Greek is dikaiosyn the go, This is not referring primarily to God's retributive justice, his punishing of sin.
Nor is it referring to a human work of righteousness that man somehow generates and offers to God.
No, it is the righteousness from God. It is a righteousness achieved completely by Christ's perfect, sinless life and his atoning death on the cross.
In the Reformed view, aligned strictly with the Westminster Confession, this righteousness is imputed to the believer.
That means it is legally credited to their account. God the judge pronounces the sinner righteous, not because the sinner is inherently good, but because the perfect righteousness of Christ is placed upon them like a garment.
Think of it like a destitute person with massive debts. A benefactor doesn't just pay off the debt, he transfers his entire fortune into the destitute person's bank account.
The bank now views that person as wealthy. God views the believer through the lens of Christ's perfect record. This righteousness satisfies the demands of the law and is applied by the act of justification for the sanctification of life.
It is the self-communication of the righteousness which proceeds from God, becoming the personal property of the believer by a living union with Christ.
And it is revealed from faith to faith.
He brings in the quotation from the Old Testament prophet Habakkuk, "The just shall live by faith."
From faith to faith indicates a progression. Faith is the instrumental cause of salvation. It is not the efficient cause that is God's grace. It is not the objective ground that is Christ's work.
Faith is simply the empty hand that receives the gift.
It doesn't earn the gift, it just takes hold of it.
Yeah.
The phrase, from faith to faith, shows that faith must be continually renewed.
It moves from the objective revelation of faith in the preaching of the gospel to the subjective reception of it in the heart.
Growing from one degree of living trust to another. As Habakkuk said, the justified man shall obtain and maintain his life entirely by his trust in God. It is a complete reliance on the righteousness that comes from outside of himself.
Immediately after declaring this glorious saving righteousness, we hit a major shift in the text. Verse 18 starts, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness."
Right after grace we get wrath.
In Reformed thought, you cannot understand grace without understanding wrath.
If there is no wrath, there is nothing to be saved from, and the cross becomes meaningless. God's wrath, as described in the commentary, is not a petty human emotion.
It is not like our unpredictable anger or a sudden loss of temper.
No, it is God's holy, personal, and righteous displeasure against sin. It is the absolute pure energy of the divine government reacting against rebellion.
A good judge cannot simply smile at a murderer and let them go. His goodness requires him to enact justice.
God's wrath is the necessary reaction of his holiness against evil. Notice, it is revealed from heaven. It is a message from the height of the holy supernatural world.
It manifests itself in punitive decrees, in the terrors of death, and, as we will see, in the terrifying abandonment of sinners to their own lusts.
The root cause of this wrath is men holding back or suppressing the truth in unrighteousness.
How are they doing this?
The apostle is walking us through the concept of natural revelation. Verse 19 says, "Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them."
And verse 20 continues, "For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse."
God's invisible attributes are clearly visible in the created order. The universe is a massive school displaying the general knowledge of God.
The intricate design of the cosmos, the biology of life, the moral law written on the conscience, it all screams of a creator.
Man's intellect is not lacking evidence. The problem is not a lack of data. The problem is a corrupt will. The human heart actively suppresses the truth because it loves sin.
Think of holding an inflated beach ball underwater. The natural tendency of the ball is to pop up to the surface, but you have to exert constant willful effort to hold it down.
That is what humanity does with the knowledge of God. This willful suppression leaves all of humanity entirely inexcusable before God. They cannot claim ignorance on Judgment Day.
What was the original sin that led to all this darkness for the Gentile world? Verse 21 lays it bare.
Because that, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened.
They knew him, but they didn't glorify him or give thanks.
The gravity of the sin of omission here is terrifying. The genesis of all human depravity starts right here, failing to offer praise and gratitude to the Creator.
It doesn't start with murder or theft. It starts with a lack of thankfulness.
Imagine a spoiled child who lives in a mansion eats the finest food, and wears the best clothes, but completely ignores the parents who provide it all, refusing to even say thank you.
Because humanity refused to honor God as God, their minds became idle and foolish in devising vanities.
Their thoughts, their speculations, their philosophies became empty. As a result, their foolish heart, the very center of their moral life, was plunged into darkness.
The mind is darkened as a direct penal consequence of the heart refusing to give thanks.
Verse 22 points out a tragic irony. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools.
The folly of human wisdom is staggering. The Greeks and Romans boasted of their philosophical insight. They had Plato, Aristotle, and the great Stoic thinkers.
Yet the more they boasted, the more foolish they became in their religious practices. The historical and theological descent into idolatry is detailed in verse 23.
They exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for images made like to corruptible man and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things.
They took the infinite majestic creator and reduced him to a wooden or stone statue of a reptile or a cow. Mythology and idolatry grew out of a corrupted symbolism.
They thought they could capture the divine in the material, and in doing so, they lost the divine entirely.
As the psalmist says, they that make idols are like unto them. The human mind becomes dumb and wooden by worshiping dumb wooden things.
This leads to a terrifying phrase in verse 24, wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts.
We see this phrase, God gave them up, repeated. This is the first abandonment.
We need strict theological clarity here to align with Reformed orthodoxy.
Yes, this abandonment, this giving up, is a judicial, punitive act. God does not force men to sin. He is not the author of evil.
Rather, as a righteous judge, he simply withdraws his restraining grace.
He steps back and leaves them to the corrupt lusts of their own hearts. Think of taking the leash off a vicious dog. You don't have to force the dog to attack. You just stop restraining it.
It is the principle of sin being punished by sin.
By withdrawing his spirit, the negative punitive judgment becomes positive, because without God's restraint, the human heart naturally plunges into deeper corruption. They are delivered over to uncleanness, to dishonor their own bodies.
The text shows how this abandonment progresses. Verse 25 says, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever.
Because of this, we hit the second abandonment in verse 26. For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections, or shameful passions.
Look at the specific consequences described in verses 26 and 27.
Lange notes a direct correlation. Unnatural theology directly produces unnatural morality. By abandoning the natural order of worship, humanity was judicially given over to abandon the natural order of human relations.
Worshipping the creature instead of the Creator.
Yes. The apostle points out the degradation of both women and men, burning in their lust one toward another, working that which is unseemly.
The text states they received in themselves the due reward of their error.
The punishment is proportionate to the crime. The lie against the divine nature results in a lie against human nature. It is a fearful picture of what happens when a society completely severs its anchor to the truth of God.
It is a dark reality. We see the third and final stage of this descent in verse 28. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind, to do those things which are not convenient.
The Greek language here contains a brilliant and terrifying play on words.
What is the wordplay?
The text uses the verb dokimazo, which means to test or approve, and the adjective adokimos, which means unapproved or worthless.
Because humanity did not think it worthwhile or did not see fit to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a worthless adokimos mind.
The human mind did not lose its intellectual capacity. It did not lose its ability to reason, build aqueducts, create stunning art, or write brilliant poetry.
But its moral compass became entirely corrupted.
The perceiving and deciding intelligence became warped, leading them to do things that are completely unbecoming of human dignity. Imagine a highly sophisticated compass where the needle is broken. It might look beautiful, but it will lead you off a cliff.
This leads to a staggering catalog of sins in verses 29 through 31. It reads like a terrifying rap sheet of humanity.
Being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful.
It's overwhelming.
The commentary helps us group these sins logically to see the systematic breakdown of society. It starts with inner vices, unrighteousness, malice, covetousness,
Then it moves to violent acts against society.
envy, murder, strife, deceit. Then it details psychological corruption, people becoming untrustworthy, heartless, unmerciful, without natural affection.
Notice how disobedient to parents is listed right alongside murder and haters of God.
In the biblical view, rebellion against God-given authority at the familial level is a severe symptom of a reprobate mind. It is a fountain of corruption that destroys the basic fabric of human society. When the family breaks down, the society crumbles.
We arrive at the ultimate climax of this rebellion in the chilling final verse, verse 32. Who, knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them.
It's not just that people commit these sins in a moment of weakness.
This is the absolute pinnacle of human rebellion.
It is a demoniacal mindset. Sin is not just practiced. It is institutionalized, defended, and celebrated as a guiding maxim.
The text says they know the righteous decree of God. Their conscience remains intact enough to know that such actions deserve death.
They understand the moral law written on their hearts, yet their corrupt will actively defies it. They applaud and endorse others who practice wickedness.
This is the extremity of sin, where the intellect itself is weaponized to patronize and approve of evil.
So what does this all mean for us? Let's bring this discussion full circle.
This deep dive into Romans chapter 1 reveals the absolute desperate necessity of the gospel mentioned back in verses 16 and 17.
The terrifying reality of God's wrath and the thoroughness of human depravity, from the suppression of truth to the celebration of evil, proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that no one can save themselves.
Morality cannot save us. Philosophy cannot save us. Salvation must come entirely from the outside.
It must come from the imputed righteousness of Christ received by faith alone.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. Consider how the suppression of truth is not just an ancient historical event that happened in the Roman Empire.
It is a present reality in modern culture. The human heart still suppresses the truth of God in unrighteousness.
I ask you to reflect on your own life. We saw that the root of all this darkness, the genesis of depravity, began with a simple, quiet failure to give thanks to God.
It began with the sin of omission.
If that is true, how might the daily practice of radical gratitude act as a shield against the creeping darkness of a vain imagination?
If ingratitude leads to a reprobate mind, then a heart aggressively thankful to the Creator is a heart anchored to reality, protected from the lies of idolatry.
That is a challenging and essential thought to walk away with. Thank you for joining this session of Reformed Thinking.